I think Joe Dispenza said this first, so I'm not going to take credit for the title. I mean, I've heard it many times in a variety of sources, but I do want to expand upon it in a way that might be helpful and ground it in a way where it doesn't sound so metaphysical, but it actually makes complete sense psychologically. And actually, it might even feel like common sense after sort of pondering it for a bit longer. So your personality creates your personal reality because who you are is the experience of life. You're always going to experience life through the filter of your perception and your perspective. So that's why when we're looking to change our life, we have to change who we are because we're always going to experience life through the perspective of us as an individual. So whatever identity you have, whatever beliefs you have about yourself, whatever it is that you find when you look in the mirror, when the self is reflected. And I don't mean physically, I mean intrinsically and, your personality archetype, whatever it is you might want to call it. Every experience in life first goes through this filtration process. So when you see a bunny, two people can have completely different experiences. Someone who's, you know, pet bunny just passed away is going to have a completely different experience seeing a random bunny in the woods than someone who is just seeing a random bunny in the woods. And we might say that, you know, the latter person is having the more neutral experience, so that must be what reality is. But I would actually argue that reality seems to be much more malleable than we think it is. And I don't mean malleable in the way where we're actually changing the structural form of reality, but we're changing the events that come about in our life through our perception and perspective, and therefore our actions. So when you perceive something a certain way, that's going to fuel you to take certain actions. And let me break this down even more simply. I believe firmly that there are things within the realm of attracting circumstances that we can control and that we maybe can't. I don't know the full spectrum of metaphysical abilities of manifestation, law of attraction. I don't know the full scheme of how it works. And I don't want to, lie to you or bluff and say that I do. But what I do know is, and that we all know, is that our actions have a cause and effect. And that depending on who we are going to take different actions based on a varying principle of every person, the varying principles and perspectives of those people. That's very rudimentary. A little kid can understand the fact that everyone is a different person and is going to do a different thing based on who they are. And that begs a very important question. If who we are is going to decide the actions that we take in life, and if the actions that we take in life are going to affect the future that happens to us, then wouldn't we start at changing the filtration system from which these actions are being born from? Wouldn't we first take the step of changing who we are as an identity, changing what we think about ourselves, changing our beliefs about who we are, about life, and then just trust that the appropriate actions will be taken from that state of being? So let's go back to that example. The person whose pet bunny just passed away sees a random bunny in the woods. What is their life experience of that moment going to be compared to someone whose pet bunny didn't just pass away? They don't even have a pet bunny. They never had a pet bunny. They might find a lot of hidden meaning in this interaction. They might say, wow, what are the chances that a bunny just crossed my path when my pet bunny just passed away? And this might affect the way that they take future actions in their life, rather than the other person who's going to see no significance in this event and is probably not going to have that much of a change in their actions um, in the present moment and in the future and whatever else. So, which reality is objectively true? And we're going to see that we could probably argue both ways. That one of the realities is that a bunny just so happens to be in the forest. And then you can make the argument, that in some sort of spiritual, metaphorical way, that this bunny was a representation of something in that person's life. What we're going to find is it doesn't matter as much as we were led to believe, because no matter what that reality is, depending on how that person interprets what just occurred is going to affect the actions that they take. And the actions that they take are going to have an effect on reality itself. That is a fact. Actions have an effect on reality. That is a fact. Is it possible that there is some sort of metaphysical component to this as well? Of course. But if we don't 100% know, then let's not act like it's in our control just yet. What we can control is what's going on inside of us. We can control our perception, we can control our perspective, we can control our beliefs, we can control the thoughts that we're giving life to. And I'll first give you my belief, and then I'll give you my proposition. My belief is that there is some sort of principle at play where the relationship that we have with ourselves is somehow, a magnet to the experiences in our life. And I do mean that metaphysically. Do I know it for a fact? I don't, but I do have a hunch, and that's it. That's all I'll say in the matter. And now we can get back to the logistics of it. Well, I'll say, what do we have to lose from engaging in some sort of an identity transformation process where we are not only going to feel better about ourselves, we're not only going to enjoy life more, because that's what changing our identity and our quote unquote personality can do, but also it's going to affect the actions that we take for a positive benefit. We don't have to argue that actions have a consequence in reality. There's nothing to argue there. If you kick a ball, the ball is going to go in a certain direction. You can't control which direction it's going to go, but you can control if you kick the ball. And you would have never kicked the ball if you didn't have the inclination to do so. So we have to start at point one, which is controlling the way that we exist in life, controlling the experience of life simply by changing who we are and how we're engaging with everything around us. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, how do we so-called change our personality to have an effect on our personal reality without feeling inauthentic, without feeling fake? And I think the first thing to note is that the prerequisite is faking it till you make it is, a very basic way to put what's happening, but it's a real fundamental truth and it's backed by neuroscience and it's called neuroplasticity. Our brains can readjust the way that it's functioning based on the experiences it encounters in life. So your brain is always observing your actions. Your brain is always observing the way you go about things. Your brain is observing your inner process. And from there, it is creating an identity and a sense of self. And it is through this sense of self where it makes predictions and estimates from which signals to send you. So the brain really isn't so random in its functioning. Some thoughts that we get are random, some bad thoughts, but that's where we practice mindfulness, which I talk about all the time. It's a detachment from thoughts. But what we'll see is that the brain starts supporting what it believes to be true. And the good thing is, we don't have to convince ourselves of it. We just have to do it enough times to ingrain it in the subconscious. Because the conscious awareness that we have, the doubts that we have that we can change, that we could be a different type of person, that doesn't negate the subconscious process of absorbing information and using it to create a sense of self. That's what we have to understand, because this is where most people stop. Most people never transform their life or their reality in a truly, spectacle sort of way, because they experience doubt, they experience negative thoughts disguised as their old identity, and they believe that the whole thing is useless and that it's not working. When in reality, all you have to do is not argue with that doubt. It's quite reasonable to doubt that you can change who you are because you've been living as a certain person, you've been living in a certain way your whole life. So you actually don't have to win the debate against the doubt. You just have to let the doubt exist and continue with the process of feeding your brain an identity that you wish to embody. So when you take certain actions, when you talk in a certain way, when you carry yourself in a certain way, these are all things that are going to shape the brain's perception of who you are. The brain is creating a character, and it is from this character that it predicts what you will want, it will predict what you will need, and it will come up with its best solutions and strategies to help you. So if you go for 6 months acting like a version of yourself that you haven't been before, then the brain is going to start to change itself. Not just start, 6 months. It's going to be well endowed with the process of change, and it's going to have a completely different perception of, you could even say, the human that it's attached to or involved with. I'm not sure the correct wording there, but your brain is more of a sort of system. It's almost like a computer, whereas your conscious awareness, the decision that you're making, if you were to watch this video, to wake up tomorrow and act like a new version of yourself, that choice, that decision, I would go as far as to say maybe that wasn't made by the mind as we know it, but it was rather made from a place of conscious awareness, conscious direction. One can even say consciousness itself. So as you go about waking up in a certain way, you walk a certain way, you do the dishes a certain way, you make your breakfast a certain way, you're carrying this energy about you. You're saying, this is a new version of me. This is a new sense of self. And right now, I actually have no job. I don't really have to do anything except keep feeding my subconscious and my brain the information that this is who I am. So I'm going to put on a little show for it. And in a matter of time, my brain will start to catch on, and this confidence, this empowerment, this presence is going to start to feel very natural to me. And again, this is where most people trip up, because they're going to wake up, they're going to try it. After watching this video, they're going to wake up the next day, they're going to try it, and they're going to immediately get hit with that same sense of gloom or anxiety or fear that they usually do, that they usually wake up with. And what they're going to feel is though, they're going to say, this isn't working. But what isn't working? You haven't tried yet. You haven't done anything yet. Of course, your brain and your sense of self is not going to be adjusted, right away. It's going to take a little bit of time. And again, you don't have to win the debate against the doubt in your mind. It's okay to be doubtful. You don't have to get rid of the doubt. You don't have to get rid of the fears. You don't have to get rid of the anxieties of, is this really possible? Just keep implementing the practice. Keep being a version of yourself. Keep doing things a certain way. And your brain will start to associate you with this version of yourself. Some people will say, that's quite delusional to believe that you can just sort of will your way into being a new version of yourself, a new person. Well, how else would you do it? How else would you change yourself? How else are you supposed to change your life if the actions start from a sense of self? We must first become the type of person who would take the actions needed to change our reality, and then our reality will change. Because think about it. Maybe the older version of you would never even think to take certain actions that this new version of you would. And it is because this new version of you would take these certain type of actions that reality now changes. So who do you blame there? Where do you get the inspiration to take a certain action from? Your identity, your sense of self, the beliefs that you have about what you're capable of. That's what it is. Where necessarily do ideas come from, and when and how do our brains treat it differently depending on the type of person that we are? So you're going to go about your day-to-day life, you're going to be moving in a certain way, you're going to be trying to, keep a positive attitude, keep a good mindset after you listen to or watch this video. And then that doubt's going to creep in, that resistance is going to creep in, and then there's going to be two things that happen. Probably most people are going to turn around and give up. They're going to say, this is useless, this is pointless. Like, what am I even doing? There's no point in even doing this. And then the other people are going to say, I got nothing to lose anymore. I've been acting the same way. I've been recycling the same experience for so long. I got nothing to lose. Even if I don't think it's working, I'm just going to do it just in case. So do it just in case. Program your subconscious just in case. Try to convince yourself you're confident just in case it works. Why not try just in case? And you might say, how? How do I do it? And to that I would say, how would that version of you behave? How would that version of you talk? How would that version of you confront fear? How would they deal with anxiety? How would they do these things? And I know there's going to be a sense of what they would do that comes to your mind. And the important thing is that you don't think that it's out of reach. It's not out of reach. If you can imagine a version of yourself, it already exists. So the important thing, the necessary thing, is that we realize the only thing standing in our way, sorry, there's kind of two things standing on our way, one imaginary, one not. Number one is the doubt that we talked about before. The doubt, is this really working? Is this worth it? Whatever else. But that's not really there. It's more a perception of what's possible. So we don't really have to do anything about the doubt. We don't have to prove the doubt wrong. We just have to keep feeding our subconscious, and eventually we will feel natural. Actually, I want to add one more thing before I get to that second point. The whole point of this is that you're going to forget about it. You're going to be, maybe for a month, 2 months, however long or whatever it takes, you're going to be implementing this new sense of self, this new personality into your life. And at first, it's going to feel extremely robotic. You're going to have to really put a lot of effort into being this certain version of you. You're going to have to remind yourself to go about things in a certain way. And then slowly over time, it's going to be kind of put in autopilot. And then months down the line, maybe even years, someone may ask you, wow, like, how did you become so confident? How did you become so self-assured in yourself? And you're going to say, I don't know. It just, it just happened. And then you're going to pause for a minute and you're going to think, you're going to say, wait a minute. I had to make the decision to be like this. I chose to be like this. I had to train my mind to support this version of myself. This didn't happen by accident. And whether you want to tell them how you did it or what you did, I mean, that's up to you. But it's going to be an autopilot. You're going to forget about it. And that's the beauty of it, is that all that doubt you experienced at the beginning, it'll slowly fade. You're slowly going to become more assured in the practice without even having to convince yourself that it works. Because the proof that it works is you're going to forget about it and you're going to be enjoying your life as that new version of yourself. So, going back a little bit, that second thing, that real thing that we're actually going to have to overcome is the discomfort of being that new version of ourselves. So anything that stands in the way, anything that's trying to limit us from becoming and being that version of us, that is going to be our whole sort of educational module. It's important that we don't turn back when we face that discomfort. When that little voice says, no, you can't walk into this room confidently. No, you're not capable of making this happen, or whatever else. There's going to be a discomfort there. There's going to be fear. There's going to be anxiety. And it's probably already the same fear and anxiety you already experience in your life. But you have to approach it very differently now, because the version of yourself that you're looking to be would approach them differently. It's not that that version of you doesn't experience fear or a little bit of anxiety here and there, but more so that they approach it extremely differently. They don't allow they don't allow themselves to be deterred as a result of fear and anxiety. They don't take the voice and the opinion of fear and anxiety more importantly than their own aspiration and their own imagination of what is possible for themselves. They prioritize different things. They prioritize experience. They prioritize happiness. They prioritize feeling and presence. These are the qualities that the new you embodies, or whatever and however you choose to embody them, and whatever you're envisioning and imagining for yourself to be. So yes, your personality creates your personal reality. And whether you want to take that at a metaphysical level is up to you. That doesn't matter. That's fueled on the basis of belief. But if we want to fuel this entire process on the basis of proof, then we can go about it in changing the way we are. And that as a result will change the actions that we take. The actions that we take will affect our future. Not only that, if we can find a way to make if we can find a way to make life more enjoyable by changing our state of being, why wouldn't we? And this doesn't mean you have to put your whole life on pause. No, actually, the complete opposite. Keep everything in your life going. Maybe even add more if you have the availability to add more on your plate, and carry this new version of you everywhere you are already planning on going. You don't change everything right away. You change who you are. You bring the change to these things in the form of yourself. When you show up in a different state of being, when you show up as a different you, the difference is going to be created as a result. Thank you guys for tuning into this episode. I'm going to leave a link for my book down in the description if you want to check that out. It dives into this and, all types of other stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, thank you as always. And other than that, I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.